have a CFA. In addition, for roughly 10 years, I was a portfolio sector manager at Bank One, which became JPM, and then roughly the same time at the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System here in Columbus. Therefore, same thing, sort of like a portfolio manager. So I've been around the block a little bit. So we'll give you a little sense of really what we do. Today, actually, I work just above us 4 floors on the trading desk with Nationwide. We manage roughly about 120 billion in assets under management, mostly fixed, as you would expect from a mutual insurance company. Not surprising there, but we do have a fair amount of alternatives and some equities. So we'll talk about that a little bit in how we kind of look at the market. We actually embed, meaning that my job, I'm not going to be able to do it this morning. My boss will take over for me, is I talk to roughly 150 people every morning at 8:40 in the morning about the economic releases. They're mostly timed at 8:30 in the morning, but we then, pick up the other ones that come through the time. For example, this morning there was a little bit of push even further on housing purchases, the mortgage data, the weekly mortgage data. So I try to do things real time, because that's really what I find people are interested in. They're not worried about 30 or 40 years ago. They're interested in what we're doing today. So that's sort of the setup here. I have to provide, and I think this is a great idea. We're redoing this. We do it on a quarterly basis. This is a flip chart. If you're familiar with Guide to the Markets from JPM, they actually copied us. So we'll put it that way. Actually, it's true. My boss, who worked with me at JPM Bank One, developed this sort of flip chart. They just took it a different direction. If you're familiar with that one, it's very intense, has a lot of information in it. Ours is pretty straightforward. We like it that way because we think it connects both with the advisor and with the customers. What we suggest, you can order these and they're available out at Nationwide Financial, is the really good things to take and send to customers on a quarterly basis. Why? Because when they call you and they've just seen something on CNBC, you can go, oh, that's in page 4. And then they open it, and then you can start having, I think, a better discussion than what just the news flash they saw across the screen. And actually, what we've heard from advisors is that they sort of get trained to it, the customers. And so they actually, before calling, they'll go and they'll look. It's also a very good thing just to work through when you have an annual meeting or quarterly meeting, whatever cadence you're at. It's a good level set sort of thing. So we encourage you to do that. I'm not going to take you through it all. The big one in the middle. Big one in the middle. What we try to talk to people about is have a plan and stay on your plan. And why? Because we find the markets are cyclical. There are times that things look really great, and there are times where things don't look so good. But we find that if people move away from that sort of plan, they get kind of lost in the noise that's occurring out there right now. And so what we like to do is keep focus on this dial. Yeah, we'll be honest. There are points where we get down to the bottom, where it looks like we're moving towards recession. But what I like to point out with this is even though we're moving down, there is an upside at some point. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. We've got some elephants in the room. We've got some things that we have to address right now. And then as we move forward, we think those will clear. And we're actually pretty excited about the future. We're in a unique place because of technology, work from home, a lot of dynamic energy. We actually call the use of phrase green shoots that are out there that people are not even seeing today. But let's talk about the elephants in the room. And this is where I get to ask my first question of you is, how do we get here? Right? It's really kind of a perplexing problem, right? We've had interest rates go up 5%, 500 basis points, right? And, at the end, we do see some issues out in terms of the market, inflation, right? But we don't really see in the employment area, how's that been? Been pretty good, right? That's not really where we're supposed to be right now. So we have to deal with the evil empire. We actually call it the Fed. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how Jay Powell handles the comments. I think we got sort of a grand compromise a week ago, which was we're not going to raise anymore. We're kind of done with that. But I've got these hawks that are sitting over here who see inflation, we're worried, and they think the skies are falling. So I'll throw them something. And that will be, we'll let them put the dot plots out there. That's their projections of future rates. Really, they're not good forecasts. So putting a lot of credence like the market did last week into it is a little odd. But if you remember, I don't know how many people here have watched the musical Hamilton. Right? There's that song in it, wanted to be in the room where it happened. Right? So what happened in that? And how does it affect today? Well, we know what Jefferson got in Madison. They got the capital moved down to DC from New York. But what did Hamilton get? He got the first bank of the United States. All the debts of the colonies was put into the US Treasury, and the government, the US government backed them up. And what was the theory that he worked with? Was that if the US, the federal government backed these debts, that would make an efficient capital system for the country. And it sort of worked. Things moved on. And then roughly 20 years later, I lost our way. The charter was actually for 20 years. And so it was not renewed. Maybe a few years after that, the Redcoats came again. And very quickly after the Redcoats came, the government realized, we're not doing this economic thing too well, right? So the second thing started. Then we fast forward to the 1830s, and it expires again. The Fed is really the third bank of the United States. Right? We went all the way time from 1830s to 1913 to create the bank, to create the third bank. And it was done without concentration to New York. So we have all these regional banks. And it was sort of the map of the country in 1910, right? You have two banks in Ohio, Cincinnati and Cleveland. It doesn't look really, they're not really, Missouri, where you have Kansas City and St. Louis at the time. So you have this really kind of weird sort of map. So it was intended to be a diversifier that wouldn't have concentrated power. Failed again, didn't it? Right? They're sitting there raising interest rates at the same time. Interesting stat that came out of last month's Michigan survey of sentiment, right, was that 50% of Americans do not trust the government on economic policies. Can you blame them? Look at the debt we've increased. Look at, where we sit, with interest rates, where we sit with inflation, and how we got there at the end of the day. And you kind of go, this really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And so the problem that we're in is that inflation, and we'll talk a little bit about that now. Inflation, which is generally occurs late in the cycle, really never went away during the pandemic, right? Typically what happens is, and we were in what we like to call an inversion, and where we sit today. What are inversions? It's when short-term rates are longer than long-term rates. And that's not a comfortable position, right? I try to teach my students there's a time value of money, right? And the longer you wait, you should get a little more compensation for it, but we're upside down. And that upside down is not good for the economy over a long period of time. So we want to recognize that it does have an effect. And its effect, particularly on the financial markets, is not good in banking, right? Because the purpose of a bank, right, is to take money in. I do play in my courses the run on the bank from It's a Wonderful Life. Right? It's the same thing we just saw earlier this year. If you want to remind yourself of what a run on bank does, because back in the era, and still actually today, there are a lot of financial institutions that don't have the FDIC or the state guaranteed insurance element. And really, our banking system is a fiat, based on the fiat currency, which means space. We've got to believe in each other. We've got to believe in the dollar. We have an advantage in the dollar. I did teach in Oman too. Their currency is pegged to the dollar. Why is it pegged to the dollar? Because the dollar is the currency of oil. That's what oil trades in. And that's why they keep it pegged to the dollar. So we have a layup. We have an early advantage. Biggest economy connected to the biggest commodity that's traded in the world. We have that advantage as we go forward in our economy and in how we sit. So we have sort of a backbone of faith. But when we lose that faith, and when banks, right, they have to try to make money. And when short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, they're kind of in a pickle of how to do that. And so we sort of walked into that trap that was set actually by this group in Washington called the Federal Reserve. Now, I've been studying banking for roughly 25 years. It's actually the home sector, financial analyst before I started in the economic side of the equation. And what's dynamic about finance, and I think this room shows it even today, is it is dynamic. Meaning it's always changing, it's always modifying. And when there's a problem, it moves, right? Credit cards, right? Credit cards, first credit cards, B of A. Actually, Merrill started developing the ATM machine. That's sort of how that all started back in the 1980s, believe it or not. Yeah, they actually a trivia question for you is they actually signed up with Bank One. Merrill worked with Bank One out of Ohio to start the first ATM. When we had my first kids and my wife stayed home for a bit, I had to get cash to stop by the grocery store because there were no ATMs. We had one checkbook, that's the way. So it's a really different world. And that, what we call velocity, is really intensified. And really, that's what we saw, right? We saw a huge amount of velocity moving towards different banks, higher interest rates, and then moving away very quickly because they were all short-term rates, right? They could move overnight. Now, we believe that actually the economy will weather that storm because of the innovation, right? Credit cards, I mentioned B of A, right? So what happened to the credit card industry? All the bank credit cards sort of folded into First USA and MBNA, which have now moved on to their, ironically, one is at Chase and one is at B of A. So that's how the sector works. And that's the momentum that we see in that area. So we think that's going to continue to move us through this element. We do think this is temporary in a sense because we do see the end of inflation. Inflation has been rather sticky, and the area it's been really sticky on has been the housing sector. That's really what we have to deal with moving forward. If you look back, 2010, the Fed looked at 35-year-olds. And what they found is those 35-year-olds who, 35-year-olds, they look back at where they were in 2010, and then they look back to where they were in 2000 when they were 25. What did they find? That was the first demographic segment ever to lose money in housing as a group. Housing is supposed to go up, right? It's supposed to go up steady, right? You're supposed to buy that first home, supposed to build the equity in it. You're supposed to move forward with that. And then when you get the bigger family, then you move into a little bigger house and you've got a little equity that's built up over your payments when you started. That down there. I had a student when I first started teaching. She was from Phoenix. She worked for Bank One. She had come up here from Bank One. And I asked, how was Phoenix doing and what she was. She said she was so glad to get out of Phoenix. Sold her condo. I was asking her about that situation. And she said, yeah, it was really bad for running the HOA. You look kind of young to run the HOA. She said, well, we had 50 condos. We were down to 2 people. 2 condos actually owned. And they were going to lose the condo if they didn't keep up the common properties. So they had to figure out how to paint. They had to figure out how to get the paint, who to hire for the paint. So we are still today living in the aftermath of that generation. As we went into the 2010s, we just didn't build houses. We just didn't. It took 5 years to go through the immediate supply. Now, 10 years later, from that, more or less, we're still sort of trying to figure out. We have a drastic lack of supply in houses today. Because what happened? Pandemic hit. Everyone did work from home. It was like a flash. And if you didn't get in on that move, that grand relocation, right? I'll tell you, it's been a struggle ever since for people. And people are, as you pointed out, right? Jobs are good. Not bad. I mean, we're not cranking out 500,000 jobs a month, but we're doing 2 to 3, which is good. So we've got a lot of people who are forming households who are getting good jobs and are waiting to buy a house. Now we got a little better news. The home builders early this year really took it on the chin, which they sort of needed to. They had cancellations running in 1 quarter up to 60 to 70%. These were people that had pretty much started the building process. They had the mortgage. They had it all signed up that they were going to close in 3 or 4 months. And they basically told the company, no, we'll take the loss. We're done. And that was a real wake up. And you can't blame the individual, right? Interest rates are up to 6 and 7%. Inflation had been moving, so the affordability problem was out there, and prices. Amazing. And so they responded, no. Because I think what they were expecting, and I think we're all looking as lumber came down and all that, there'd be a clearing that goes on. Okay. Still really hasn't occurred yet. We're running at 1 million houses for sale, which is low. We usually run 1.4. At the same time, mortgage rates are high. And so we've got this dance going on. We actually just saw yesterday one of the better housing starts numbers. I'm not clear that it's over yet, but housing is going to be that inflationary element that is going to stick around for a while. The good news with it is it's discriminatory, and I mean that in a good sense, in a sense that there are people who have the 3% mortgage and who are not moving. And so it's not a broad issue. It's not like what? right? When gas goes up, we all feel it. So there are parts of the population, which I should say, are not feeling the full impact. Now, that doesn't mean we should be insensitive to the ones who are. I think we need a route away from that and away from inflation, but I think we're sort of getting there. So I think that's a good sign for the housing. But if we take out housing inflation, and it's really, at the end of the day, a goofy thing anyways, right? The way the bean counters count it is if I'm renting my own house and how much it would cost to rent my own house. I point out to them, I would be a terrible landlord. I would never get the repair done and I would charge myself too much. So, not a fair measure. So with that being said, we then look at the other parts of the economy. And we are seeing service inflation, which has been the one that's hung on the most coming down. So we do think as we move throughout this year, we will see better inflationary numbers. And with that, we will see the Fed back off its actions. We are nearly done. It has been the highest, quickest increase in the Fed funds rate that we've ever seen. It even, at this point, makes Volcker look a little whippish. You remember back in the seventies. So, because his was actually over a longer period that we had to take it, and it started from like 80 to 14. So, it's here we're.
Well, you see because of property taxes and insurance rates, rental costs or housing costs will rise for some time. Because that stuff lags way behind where rents are at, so your LEs today, and it's based on last year, the year before. Insurance costs and tax, and I have a lot of investors have been telling me that they're losing money on the properties right now. Because of they're not accounting for the tax or the insurance.
Yes, and I think that's going to be really regional. And it kind of goes to that, the kind of the bifurcation that's sort of occurring out there right now. You have different municipalities with different tax systems, and the different tax systems have a tendency to favor one side versus the other. Right. A fun fact, Ohio has the most different taxing agencies. So we have tax agencies for libraries, parks, we've got other states don't do tax code that way. So it makes taxation a really difficult question. I think what you're gonna find is as the baby boomers in generation one, that value of that school district, staying in that school district is going to lessen and lessen and lessen. That's actually, I speak to regularly the National Association of County officials, and I try to really emphasize to them that they have to have a brand for their community, keep people attracted to their areas. So they focus on the benefits, some of the, particularly the urban side of the equation, they can mitigate some of those issues. But you're right, it's real to those property owners. And I think it's, we here in Ohio are going through our every 3-year evaluation. I think as that spreads throughout the country, you'll continue to see that. The good news on an economic basis is that the states are in pretty good shape, right? Because they're getting the benefit of all this activity, right? And it's actually a nominal increase, right? They're getting the whole, they're not getting it less inflation. They're getting the whole benefit. So that's actually kind of helpful part of the story, that we don't have states that are financially impaired that need to raise rates. But yeah, I think it's a very local issue, and it's one that you really have to think through what your long-term plan with those policies are. Other questions, please?
So the Fed's paused their interest rates the other day, and talking with some banking friends, you know, what they're getting the feedback from the FDIC or from the feds is that they're seeing 1 to 2% drop over the next 12 months. Is what they were told back 30 days ago. Do you see that or?
The easing,
Yes.
yeah, it's typically, historically, and that's really when I bring you back to this chart here, because this is the point we talk about here. And this is actually a weighted sort of clock, because when it goes down fast, but then you have the momentum coming up. And honestly, this is actually a really good spot for the market, believe it or not. Because you've got the reversion of that. I think it's going to be mitigated this time. Why? Because I see a soft landing. And a soft landing means that, yes, inversions, which we've had, mean recession. So at some point, either at the end of this year, we should have 2 down quarters of economic activity. I think the momentum is so strong that they will be very viable. We're already seeing it in CapEx, which is actually an important part of the equation. I think we're going to start seeing government spending come in, and then I think at the end, we're going to see some consumption slow down. But it's not terribly surprising. Before the pandemic, our best month was 520 billion in retail sales. We're now doing 680 per month. And I know that inflation is part of that, but if you even take it off to inflation, you get around 600. So the economy is actually pretty solid. And I think, again, we're doing a little bit of bean counting. Let's get back to your question. I think because the slowdown will be slow and less, that I don't think the Fed is going to quickly decrease interest rates. So I think they'll try to work it to where the 10-year sort of ends up. And I think we're sort of there on the 10-year right now. Of course, cover my regulatory requirements. There's no promise of anything in the future. We just over the long term, we see real interest rates around 2. And we see inflation around 2. And that really should push you towards a long-term rate of how it should work. We shouldn't have negative interest rates, even on the real side of the equation. That's sort of a goofy concept. It's stimulative, particularly when you're in recession. So I would suggest that not. We're not going to move back or down too quickly. Other question? Yes.
Another quick question. So
Please.
they keep talking about the dollar being tied to the oil and oil drive everything. With all the Green New Deal, keep talking about, is that going to change the effect of the oil?
I think that the geopolitics associated with oil continues to be something to keep your eyes on. First, 2023 will match or come close to matching 2019, according to the EIA, which is the Energy Information Agency. Yes, production is back domestically, and that's really changing the nature of the oil game, right? We were absent, particularly natural gas. What did natural gas mean? It meant that nuclear and coal had to pick up the electrical grid of the United States. At the same time, we had the 3rd year of La Nina. La Nina has ended. La Nina had a tendency, each of those, the cycles have winners and losers. Just like anything, right? They have those types of things. This one had a particular focus on warmth, particularly in the South, where the population gains have been. And that's what created that. Renewables are helping, right? What's also helping is these enormous, have you seen the LNG boats? They're amazing. LNG, liquid natural gas, is 4 times less dense than oil. So you have to ship, you get the same BTU, you have to ship 4 times the amount. It has been a real help to Europe. Those boats have, more boats are leaving the southeast here and going to Europe to fill up their sources. So they're less dependent on Russia. I think that's helpful. Keep your eye on Turkey. The re-election there was not particularly good for geopolitics. Part of NATO, right? But also has interactions with the rest of that region, particularly the Saudis, the Russians, and the Ottomans. So mischievousness will still be sort of abound. Oil is an important element to that. It's the funding source that they use. Now, the Saudis would rather natural gas go up. That's why you saw the production go forward. So I think oil continues to be a card in the deck, but I would suggest that it's not an ace anymore. It's kind of moving back to a 10 or a 9 in terms of power. Okay, please.
What about the supply side of housing? So in constructions, do you see that increasing over the next few years?
To be honest with you, I'm hopeful. I didn't like yesterday's numbers with that. We got housing starts, but also inside housing starts, we have activity and we have completions. And they're still running very. And, I talked to builders and asked them what's really going on. They're still having some supply chain issues. They get the house almost done. And no garage door, can't get windows. They're like, again, you can't complete it. You can't get that permit until somebody walks through and gives you the. And they're stuck. And they're like, we'd like to finish this. We'd like to get it done. Now, there are good signs, like lumber's down. Right? So that's a helpful sign. But I think it really talks about, which I'd like to address, which is, I think, your central thing, it's the employment. We are sitting here today, needing workers. Right? I just said we're gonna have a recession, and he's saying you need workers. What has happened? Most of the economy has come back, but the 55 plus have exited. They're done. They're stuck. They're done. And in a sense, you can't blame them, right? Their houses have done well. The market's done well. They're on to other things at this point, right? The only thing they really have to deal with is that 60 to 65 bubble on healthcare, right? Because you're insured when you get there, you're sort of in the gap before that. But it's just amazing to see all the other demographic groups come back in terms of the workforce. But the 50-year-olds, 55-year-olds have not. And we actually kind of need people and skills. And I still think that's something we're going to have to deal with in the economy forward. And as you said, the job market's still pretty good, right? Who's getting the jobs these days? Well, there's always an element of hospitality, always an element of retail. But we're seeing job growth in education, healthcare, and that business service category. Another bean counter category, just like housing we talked about before. But when you get down in it, it's mostly the administration. And when have you seen middle management employment go up? It's been a long time for that. And those are pretty good compensated jobs. So we're not, even today, in an inversion where we actually think jobs should move down. We're sitting there today. And one of the better categories continue to do well. And that's something I think we have to be mindful of. And on the inflation front, we do have one more piece of good news. Not really the best news in the world. I felt it personally myself. My father passed. We do see COVID did change the medical environment, particularly of the 60+ group. And I think my mom's still here, but I think a lot of people are getting that wealth transfer that was always talked about. You go back 20 years, there was always this that the baby boomers would start inheriting and then passing down to the kid. And I think that's an element that's really playing into that desire to work. Because people are finding themselves that they doing pretty good, and maybe now is a good time to sell the house in the city, go into some country and open up a cafe. And you really can't blame, right?
You wouldn't want to do an insurance agency.
That was the second. See, you put the coffee shop next to the insurance. Right?
But the residual.
That's right. You know,
And there's better margins on the cafe, buddy.
but that's my financial. See out there. So that's still learning. Now, the one thing I want to leave you with, which I think is one of the most interesting and hopeful signs as we move forward. We use this phrase called green shoots. And what green shoots are is sort of what we just talked about. New, different ways of looking at things, new, different business opportunities as we move forward. And we rarely see these types of terms being used in mainstay surveys. As, you know, I hope I wasn't being boring economist today. If I was, let me know. But we generally read all these government stuff, and the government puts all these numbers together. And there's one that's pretty popular. It's by the Institute for Supply Management. It surveys business owners. It actually goes back to pre-World War I, the concern about supplies for the war. And they actually noted in it that their current customers, these are business leaders throughout the country, are saying our current customers are slowing down. But we're finding new customers. And these are ones we've never seen before. That, I think, tells you the dynamic. As we move ahead, we went through decades of low productivity. Right? Didn't really have the skills, the technology. I would argue to you, work from home, Teams, Zoom, all these ways of connecting. I'm even sort of excited about what Elon's doing with Starlink. Starlink is a little device you can buy, put in your backyards, and it actually follows the satellite, gets you internet. Wherever you are. Hook that up to a generator, a little gas. You're still part of the human race. You can actually start your own business.
But the question is, are you gonna do it in a rental house or a house you own?
Well, there's a lot of space in the country, you know, and I think that's the element that people are struggling with, right? It's always assumed that you would live sort of near. Now people are, I'll do West Texas somewhere, because I like the area climate. What's jumping off the map right now? The Southeast. Look at the counties around Nashville. They're just exploding. I mean, poor Nashville, just hated it. And why? Right? Tax rate, right? It's one of the states that income tax is free. They've got, 9% sales tax. No state. Either, you can either be honest with your Amazon or not. The old concept that, have everything sent to Delaware or New Hampshire and pick it up, right? That's how you're gonna do it. Those things out there. The other thing that really helps is there's actually a dedicated early internet line that continues to be fiber optic that runs between Atlanta and Chicago. And it runs through Nashville because Nashville was the home of all the privatization of hospitals. You remember HCA. That really revolutionized the medical industry, and there was a lot of investment in infrastructure in those areas. So yeah, I think infrastructure is really going to be the key. So the rental is a nice location, and it's kind of the style of life. Why not, right? Back when I remember coming out when I was working at Ohio Public Employees at the time, we were hiring people, after the great financial recession. And what they did was they rented here in Columbus and they just rented their home in Chicago or wherever they're from. But we could see that moving forward. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I guess, sir.
it's an interesting, stuff, my own personal theory, but I see a lot of what I would call gray market. And it's not really illegal. They're doing business services as you call it, but the business isn't really formal or it's not paying taxes. The person, they're trading, they're doing things. And we're all doing it, right? You're buying some service from somebody, you're paying them through Venmo. It's just kind of this whole world. It was the quest to move the transaction thing down to $500 or $600, try to find that business from the government's perspective, or am I imagining that that's really a large sector of our economy that enables these people who aren't really in the system to survive?
Yeah, barter.
Yeah,
Barter is legendary.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, comes in different periods, right? Actually, when you go back historically and you look at this, off market or barter systems, when there are dislocations, we actually see that extra market move higher. And remember, lots of agencies, lots of taxing authorities have, created pretty cumbersome systems. And I think people are reacting to those, and I think that has created this interest in these barter transactions. And I think they will persist until there is some more uniformity in the taxing situation. I can tell you, for example, in Ohio, the school system can choose whether they tax your income or not. But it's arbitrary, meaning each school board has that right to do. So you actually have a choice. Do you want to live in a taxing district where your income is being taxed or not? Now, if you don't have kids in the system, I think you're less likely. Some people think we should. I'm gonna let you go. So I think that's what's raising the bar. It's this collision of these taxing rules with this new economy, which I actually think is exciting, but that's one of its headwinds is taxation.